Well, tomorrow is July 4th, the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And we need to remember that it's not only a declaration of independence, it's a declaration of the principles of individual liberty. It's also a declaration of secession. And today we have the Drudge Report with a Daily Mail article talking about the disunited states. And so we're going to talk about the institutions that people trust, the institutions that they don't trust, and surprisingly, it's the intelligence communities and the courts that they're telling us that they trust. We'll question that, but we're also going to take a look at the state of disunion in terms of calls for secession, particularly in Texas and in California as we go back and forth. We're also going to look at some issues of individual freedom that are centered around moves to get rid of drug prohibition. So that's coming up. Let's take a look first at this story from the Daily Mail saying that 6 in 10 Americans say they don't trust the Trump administration. That's the way they title it. But they also point out they don't trust Congress and the media. They have even worse numbers than the Trump administration and said hardly anyone trusts opinion polls. So then why are we talking about this? That's a good question, especially because this is a Marist NPR poll. NPR, people you can always trust to tell the truth, right? Let's look at what they're pushing on us. I think it's very important to understand this. What they're telling us is that, and here's the numbers, they're saying 60% of the people support the intelligence community, 60% support the courts. Seriously? And we just broke the story yesterday about how this massive lie about 17 intelligence agencies show that there's a Trump-Russia connection. We look at it. We had a retraction from the New York Times. We had a retraction from Reuters after having pushed this since October, because it was Hillary Clinton that came up with that in one of the debates. And Julian Assange immediately said, this is one of the most absurd lies we've ever seen in our lives. You realize, of course, that these 17 intelligence agencies include things like the Coast Guard, Air Force reconnaissance, and so forth. They're not involved in this. They're not saying that this is the case. And so they retracted it. The New York Times said, no, it was only 4 agencies. And it wasn't 4 agencies. Reuters says, no, it was 3 agencies. No, they were wrong as well. It wasn't the DNI, the Department of National Intelligence, is not an agency. The agencies that they said had authorized this were the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI. Nevertheless, it wasn't really those agencies, as we learned in May, and it was WorldNet Daily that pointed this out. In testimony from Clapper, former DNI director, he said actually, that's redundant, the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence. When Clapper was testifying, he said that they presented this information to a panel of select hand-picked individuals from those 3 agencies. In other words, sycophants that could be relied on to toe the party line. And he said nobody objected. Therefore, that was the consent of those 3 agencies, according to him. And then he put this out. And since he was the head of the 17 agencies, he continued to push this lie from Hillary Clinton that it was 17 intelligence agencies. This, folks, is what's called a violation of the Hatch Act. Somebody who is sitting in this position of authority, interfering in our elections. They were quick to call FBI Director Comey on it. They should be calling these other people on it. We should have some prosecutions of the Hatch Act, and we should also have some prosecutions of violations of the Constitution, violations of even the Patriot Act and the FISA Act that extended their powers. They've ignored all of these. The FISA court has told us that this is not an anonymous source in the Washington Post or the New York Times. No, it is FISA court that is telling us this, and it is Clapper who has exposed that lie in his own testimony. But these are the people that we supposedly trust, according to NPR. I mean, is this Operation Mockingbird, the CIA operation to control the media, to get them to tell us what the CIA wants to hear? How else could we explain this in a post-Snowden world? People trusting the intelligence community more than anything else? That's patently absurd. And we'll take a look at the courts as well when we come up here. But then look at the other numbers they've got. Public opinion polls, they say 35% of the people trust public opinion polls. I think that's a bit high. The Trump administration, they say 37%. That also does not jive with the numbers that we've seen. We've seen much higher approval of the Trump administration in other polls. For Congress, they say it's 29%. That's ridiculously high. Most of the polls that we've been seeing in the last years have had Congress with single-digit approval ratings. And then they say the media at 30%. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. This is NPR. This is a poll, which nobody trusts. But let's take a look at some other news about the intelligence community. And this is, I guess you could call this the intelligence community. This is the DEA. It's federal law enforcement with a single wiretap order. The U.S. authorities listened in on 3.3 million phone calls. This is from ZDNet. They say the order was carried out in 2016 as part of a federal narcotics investigation. Again, folks, the war on drugs is a war on the Constitution, a war on the rule of law, a war on our individual liberties. U.S. authorities intercepted and recorded millions of phone calls last year under a single wiretap order. You know, as Rand Paul points out, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Verizon, how do you give probable cause for 3.3 million people with one order? Well, you don't. You just ignore the law. You ignore the Constitution. 3.29 million cell phone conversations over just a 2-month period. The authorities noted that the surveillance effort led to no incriminating intercepts. None of the handful of those arrested have been brought to trial or convicted. Yet, they violated the law. What do you do when the law enforcement officers regularly violate the law? Who watches the watchers has always been the question, right? What do we do when our government becomes the biggest criminal? And of course, that is always the issue. Whether we talk about illegal torture programs or whatever, we need to understand that we cannot allow our government to become lawless. We give them a tremendous amount of power, and they have to be constrained by the law, or they will become the criminals that are the worst criminals. They will become the terrorists that are the worst terrorists. There is no worse criminal or terrorization than you can find with the government coming after the individual citizens. And as one person who is with Stanford's Law School Center for Internet and Society said, they spent a fortune tracking 26 people and recording 3 million conversations and apparently got nothing. Now, I would say he's wrong about that. What they got were new illegal powers, new powers in their minds. Things that they're going to do again. They set a precedent. He said, I'd love to see the probable cause affidavit for that one and wonder what the court thought on its first 10-day reviews when zip came in. Nothing came in. Now, in a related story, we see from Miami Herald, the latest attorney-client privacy issue at Guantanamo is called unintentional listening. Do you realize how they do this all the time? Oh, we unintentionally got information on Donald Trump. We unintentionally got information on the Trump transition team, especially Michael Flynn, and we revealed that in violation of the law. They also did it to senators, to congressmen, to journalists, to pastors. Remember the times that we've played? Many times we've played the Michael Hayden quote for you. We don't listen to bad people, he says. We listen to interesting people, people that we can get something from, get something out of. And of course, Senator Lindsey Graham is saying, how can I find out if you got my conversation? Well, we can't tell you, Senator. If we told you, we'd have to destroy your privacy. That's the circular logic that they use. A Navy prosecutor has said that unauthorized, unidentified people unintentionally overheard detainees consulting with their attorneys at a special irregular meeting site to stir the latest controversy over attorney-client privacy at the wartime prison. Any characterization, however, said Commander Douglas Short, any characterization regarding an intrusion into the attorney-client relationship is misleading. He's the lead prosecutor. But look at this June 14th letter by the Chief Defense Counsel. This is Marine Brigadier General John Baker. In it, Brigadier General Baker says there is a loss of confidence in the integrity of all potential client-attorney meeting locations after learning that some meetings were the victim of intrusive monitoring. See, that's the key, folks. We have to have a rule of law. We have to have a system of rules. And it is far more important for the government to do that, to follow those procedures, than it is that we get everybody that's out there. We need to understand that the conviction of innocent people is one of the things that we should fear. And a lawless government is one of the key things that we should fear. Let's take a look at the former Guantanamo chief who tweeted out, and this is coming from WikiLeaks, he tweeted out, he is now a New York Times, CNN, MSNBC commentator, says WikiLeaks. He called for Julian Assange's assassination. Now, that tweet has been deleted, but they retweeted it, and I got a snapshot of it before Colonel Morris Davis deleted this, and here's what he had to say. He said, drone strike was a bad hypo. Let's substitute a 7.62 round on Assange's forehead instead. Would Article 51 permit it, assuming no collateral damage? Okay, that's now deleted. That's the guy that used to be the Guantanamo chief. This is the problem, folks. When they ignore the law, they can do anything, like Obama's NDAA, indefinite detention without trial, rendition to a foreign location, torture at Guantanamo, violating attorney-client privileges, taking away trial by jury. Now we're starting to sound like the Declaration of Independence. They had seen all of this before. This was nothing new. The people who created this country, that founded this country, knew history. They knew about star chambers. They knew how dangerous it was. That's why they put in the safeguards that we no longer care about. Americans don't care about liberty. They simply want to be comfortable and safe. Well, you're not going to be safe if you're a slave. And to the extent that you give up your liberty, you become a slave. Let's take a look now at the courts. The people that NPR tells us in their opinion poll are so trusted. We have Justice Kennedy now telling the October 2018 clerkship applicants that he's considering retirement right before the 2018 midterms. Now, this was something that came up on Election Law blog. It was on the Drudge Report. And the interesting thing that they noticed when they were looking at this is a report from, again, NPR, Nina Totenberg. She did a story that was essentially on Justice Gorsuch voting 100% with Justice Thomas. And that's really good news, folks. Clarence Thomas is probably without a doubt, he's been the best justice that we've got. He was somebody, when he was coming up for confirmation hearings, and they did all kinds of things to try to take him down. I remember it was Joe Biden, and this was in the days before he had his hair transplants, his plastic surgery, his facelifts, and his Botox. Joe Biden was coming after Clarence Thomas, and he was furious that Clarence Thomas had written articles supporting the idea of natural rights. That's the Declaration of Independence, folks. Joe Biden despised Clarence Thomas, did everything he could to take him down because he supported natural rights, the idea that our liberties are given to us by God. They don't come from government. We create government to protect those liberties. And when the government becomes destructive of those liberties, it is our right to abolish or alter that government. He had a problem with that. Joe Biden despises, as does Barack Obama, he despises the principles on which this country was organized. But the good thing is that so far we've seen Justice Gorsuch voting along with Clarence Thomas. They point out with every passing day, it's become more clear that President Trump's first Supreme Court nominee, Neil Gorsuch, is probably even more conservative than the justice he replaced, Antonin Scalia. Well, that's great. You know, Antonin Scalia was a good justice. He was put in by Ronald Reagan. Unfortunately, Ronald Reagan also put in Sandra Day O'Connor, who was awful, absolutely awful in terms of individual liberty, and also put in Justice Kennedy. Justice Kennedy has been the swing justice. He's been very unpredictable. Why? Because Justice Kennedy rejects the founding principles of this country, just as Joe Biden does. He rejects the Constitution. He constantly refers to foreign law. That's why he is absolutely unpredictable. And it highlights, I think, an issue that many of us always hope for the best when we look for Supreme Court justice picks. And certainly if we had had Hillary Clinton, she would have picked very liberal statist judges. They always pick statist judges. But when it comes to conservatives, it's been a real mixed bag, just as we can see with Ronald Reagan's 3 picks. So we hope that if he steps down, that we'll get a conservative judge, as Gorsuch appears to be. Now, why do we think that he may be retiring? She said also in this report, it is unlikely that Kennedy will remain on the court for the full 4 years of the Trump presidency. While he long ago hired his law clerks for the coming term, he has not done so for the following term that will begin in October 2018. And he has let applicants for those positions know that he is considering retirement. Well, that would be very good. We would love to see him replaced, and we hope that we get a wise replacement. As I said, so far it looks like Gorsuch is a good guy. Now let's talk about the idea of secession, because 4th of July was all about secession. It was about saying that, again, as I just said, if we create a government to protect our rights that we have that are natural rights that come from God. They're not granted by government. And when that government becomes destructive of that, or I would say in the case of contemporary America, the disunited America, as Drudge put on his headlines, we have a big split, and that is characterized no better than if we look at Texas versus California. There's an article that came out on The Guardian today, Your Place or Mine. Texas liberals and California conservatives want to swap states. We're going to talk about that when we come back. We're going to talk about the fact that the Texas Boy State, which is an organization that was created by the American Legion back in the 1930s, voted for the first time in history to secede. Both houses of the Texas Boy State voted to secede. So we have this issue coming back and forth. It doesn't have to be violent, but we definitely have a disunited states. Stay with us. We'll be right back, and we'll talk about secession, and we'll talk about Obamacare, one of the worst abuses we've seen since King George. We'll be right back.
We've taken thousands of years of known research and put it together with our own 4 years of seeking and testing to find the very best systems that God gave us through Mother Nature to detoxify the body. That's why I'm introducing Z-Shield, toxic metal and chemical defense support. It's made in the USA. It's filled with known compounds from nature that are absolutely associated with detoxifying the body, and it supports the InfoWar. It is a classical 360 win. Our formula at InfoWarsLife.com is, quite frankly, simple. We go out and look at the recognized research, and we take it to the next level of quality, of purity, and of strength. Because this is what I personally use for myself and my family. We've gone through 5 or 6 different permutations in the last 4 years since we launched InfoWars Life to actually come up with this. This is the formula that I personally have been taking for over a year, and now we believe we have come as close to perfection when it comes to a detoxifier as you can possibly get. If you're not mitigating the pesticides, the heavy metals, the chemicals, if you're not trying to purify your water, if you're not trying to take products like Z-Shield that are full of known concentrated compounds that help purify our cells and our bodies, you're crazy. You owe it to yourself, you owe it to your family, and you owe it to the future of this country and the world that patriots stay as healthy and as clean and as focused as you can be, because we need you, the remnant of America, to reignite those brush fires to the next level and to be healthy and as focused as you can be. Because if you're sick, if you're over there on the sidelines and not in the fight, you're basically giving in to the New World Order. Thanks to your support and your prayers, together, we're changing the world. Now it's time to change our bodies with Z-Shield at InfoWarsLife.com.